The Fox City SCORE chapter and WHBY are pleased to bring you Biz Talk, a chance for you to hear from entrepreneurs and professionals as they share their experiences from starting to sustaining growth. Learn the skills needed for your business to be successful. If you missed anything, you can catch the Biz Talk podcast at biztalkwithscore.com. And now from the Myron Construction Studio, it's Biz Talk on WHBY.
Good morning and welcome to Biz Talk with SCORE. My name is Terry Finch. I'm a host this week, and we're going to talk a little bit more about SCORE later in the show. But for now, the SCORE chapter welcomes you in. And this week, joining me as co-host is Rick Sense. How are you, Rick?
Well, I'm doing well, Terry. What a great week we've had. We've had some beautiful spring weather again. Pretty nice.
I know. I looked outside and we had, 12, 13 inches of snow on a Monday. And then by the following Friday, it's almost all gone. And now I can't see anything out there. But
yeah, great.
Great so far. This week we have another unique business we're really looking forward to. We're going to be talking to two people from Sturgeon Spirits Distillery in Oshkosh. It's a new distillery based there. And we're going to welcome Karl Loewenstein to the show. He's the owner. And Todd McLean is the manager you call. What's your official title, Todd?
I'm the general manager.
Okay. Thank you. And as we get going, we're going to start with Karl first. Karl, can you tell our listeners about your background and how you got into distilling?
Sure. Well, I think you would start by saying that I was a moonshiner. So I was just playing with distilling in my garage. I've been doing that for a decade or so, and I had a lot of fun doing, just small batches. I've done, lots of different things in the garage, and then I decided, probably going on 5 years ago, that I was ready for a career change. Because in my previous life, I taught history at UW Oshkosh, a specialist in Russian history, and I started doing that. I came to Oshkosh in 2001, and so I've been teaching here 22 years. And then I decided that for a variety of reasons, it was time to make a change. And so I got to 55 and I could retire with my state pension, and decided to take that pension and turn my hobby into a new a second wind and a new career, I suppose. And so I began a couple of years ago starting to figure out a business plan and put this whole thing together so that we could create Sturgeon Spirits, take my hobby and turn it into a much more elaborate enterprise.
And how did you go about getting comfortable with the idea of making and selling spirits as a business?
Well, I think there are a couple pieces to that. One is I love the experimentation and the creativity and learning new things. Is, part of what I loved about being a professor was always learning something new. And so this is an opportunity as a small business owner to learn amazing amounts of new things in all sorts of different areas. But also, I did do a little research and I said, hey, this is a good growth industry. We don't have one in the Fox Valley. We specifically don't have one in Oshkosh, a distillery that is. And so both from a hobby perspective, I love doing it. And then from, the basic business research I did, this is a good segment to get into. And so it is I've been a very successful growth industry across the country, and Oshkosh was ready for one.
And when you were making the products on your own for your own consumption, and friends' consumption, obviously, when did you know they were pretty good?
I think there's a lot of experimentation that you do. And I think what I learned is that distilling is complicated, but not difficult. There's a lot of steps that you have to go through. There's recipes that you work with. And that one of the great things about distilling is that it's pretty forgiving. So like if you make a bad batch, you can distill it again and it tastes better the second time. So you get in a process where you can experiment and say, well, that wasn't so good. I'll just distill it again and the flavor will improve, or I can do some filtering. All right. There's a lot of really good ways to fix a product that goes bad, but also, I was just very successful in a way that the first thing I made was like cranberry vodka, which we now have as one of our first products. And then I done some whiskeys and bourbons. And so everything that I worked on, I figured out ways to make it taste good. And I found out that I guess in a way you could say I had a knack for it because things turned out really well for me, and I've had really good success all along the line producing products that I liked, my friends liked, and now I think our customers are very happy with.
Okay. So let's step back for a second. How did you come up with the name?
Well, obviously, we all know, right, sturgeon are really important to the Lake Winnebago watershed. They're important to Oshkosh. And I have been a huge fan of the sturgeon spearing season. I'm not a spearer myself, but it was one of the things that makes Oshkosh great. I always drag my kids out on the ice to watch the fish come in on a Saturday morning when the season opens and just enjoy the experience of the frozen lake and enjoy the experience that is, it is really unique to Oshkosh. We're the only place in the world that has this kind of frozen spearing season for fish, for these sturgeon, which are an amazing creature. But there's a second part to it. Because the house that I bought in town, here down on the lake, was built by sturgeon poachers. So I'm also connected to the history of sturgeon. I didn't know that when I bought it, but it's a nice, very nice Dutch colonial built in 1931. And I'm like, wow, this is a nice house for the Depression. Who's building a nice house? And it turns out, of course, criminals. So I did some research. We talked to the neighbors, because families had been there for a long time, and they said, oh yeah, the family that built the house, moved to the area actually first from Germany, then from North Milwaukee, and then up here, and they were fishermen. And then when they put the ban on sturgeon fishing around 1925, they continued to take them out of the lake, sell caviar and smoked sturgeon out of the back of their ice truck. And so we learned a lot about the history of sturgeon from the illegal side of things. And in fact, I met the son who grew up in the house, and he would tell us stories about how the police would raid the house. The DNR would come in and try to stop their business, but they never got caught because they had a partner who was a lieutenant in the Oshkosh PD. And so they always knew when the raids were coming, and they never got caught. And apparently he had a successful poaching business into the early 70s, before he finally retired and stopped that whole thing. And we've met some other people in the bar who've told us about, helping them out and cleaning fish and smoking them, and a whole very fascinating history. So I feel connected to the history of sturgeon, in a lot of ways. So those are the two pieces. And I think it's, been a great brand. It obviously connects us to the region and connects me to the history, which I love as a history professor. So it's great.
Okay. So you've got this idea, you've thought of the name, the products work because you like them. How do you go about setting up a business? What did you do?
Well, what I did is I used the resources of SCORE. So the first place I ran was the Small Business Development Center on the UW-Oshkosh campus, which happened to be in the same building in which I was teaching. And I met Colleen Merrill and then Dan McDermott and Dan Brosman and all these people who ran the center. And they were amazingly helpful. They gave me business plans and spreadsheets and contacts in the community. And so I really just started doing research, and I did that for probably a year. And I made business plans. I started talking to some of the local economic development agencies, Go EDC, and the Chamber of Commerce. And so I'm a real networker, and I'm a studier, right? I read books, I talk to people. And the other thing I guess I would say about this is that I've been active in the community for a long time. I was a school board member. And so I knew a lot of people in the community. And so a lot of the people I had reached out to were contacts that I already had or people who were familiar to me. And so I think Oshkosh is a great town. And so I really had a great opportunity to talk to people and small business people and economic development people, and use those resources as we put together a plan. In 2019, fall of 2019, COVID started. And so I was actually ready to start in 2019. And November of 2019, I had a building in my sights and I was thinking of starting. And then there were just those little hints that something was going wrong in the world. And I said, I better wait. And luckily I did. put it off for 2 years. And then once COVID subsided again and things started coming back to normal, I found a new place, a new piece of real estate, a building that I bought, and took the plunge November of 2021, which we dove in and started the whole process of building out the business. So lots of research.
Yeah. So as we step into that a little bit, let's talk about Todd's role and how you decided you needed help and go about bringing Todd in, and what's he do for you?
So when we got the place built, starting in late 2020, oh my gosh, 2022 at this point, obviously I was getting ready to open the place. We were just getting the doors open, and I knew nothing about managing a bar. I've never worked in one. I never had any experience in that industry at all. And so I needed someone with a lot of experience. And so I was lucky to find Todd, who was available at the moment. And he joined me as my earliest and first employee and my manager to help me figure out how to run the parts of the business, that are, very difficult and very specific to the industry. So Todd is really the industry expert that helped me move from distilling, which is obviously the first part of the job, to running a cocktail bar. And that's really how Todd's expertise got us set up and really has made this place thrive. So I'll let Todd perhaps talk a little bit about his background.
I have been in the industry for about 20-something years. I started my career as a cleaner. From a cleaner, moved up to cook. From a cook, moved to a bartender. From a bartender, moved to bar management. So I've hit every single little part of everything you need to run a cocktail bar like this. It's really easy to get lost in all of the things that need to be done. But if you just stay focused on the little things, all the big pieces fit together.
And coming into such a unique type of bar, so it's focused on premium cocktails, it's got its own distillery. What was different? Was there anything really different you had to do, or was it really just building on what you knew?
Well, considering Karl and I had a conversation a day before I started for about 45 minutes, I was all in because of the atmosphere of the place. No jukeboxes, no TVs, things that I was kind of over being in the industry for 20-something years. Loudness, drunk people, all that. I kind of wanted to get out of that. In fact, I was in the middle of updating my LinkedIn profile just to find a different job because I just recently got a master's degree. But he brought me in and he showed me what his vision was. And I absolutely loved it because I get to talk to people now instead of babysitting people. And, the next day when I came in, Karl informed me that we do not have a liquor license, so I would have to create everything to make this a fully functional bar. And that is probably the biggest difference in the whole aspect of this place. Creating everything from triple sec to Campari to bitters to all the liquors that you need to create, and craft cocktails that are at a higher quality is where we're at right now.
And who develops which cocktails go in the menu?
I used to do that. I'm lucky enough to have hired very well. I have Tanya, who is now my cocktail creator. That took something off my plate, but again, it put something back on my plate where now I get wish lists of liquors that she wants to make her cocktails. So in a way, I took something off my plate, but again, I added something to it.
And as Todd goes about with the distilling and determining what he's going to make, how does what you're trying to do in the lounge feed into what he's trying to do with experimentation and trying new spirits?
It's stuff that I kind of want him to have, right? So I asked him to, let's say, make a malt style whiskey or an Irish whiskey so I can create a Irish cream for the cocktail lounge. So it's kind of a give and take. I asked him to do something or create something on his side, and so I can bring it over here. It all starts over there. Karl's the one that makes the beautiful spirits that make our drinks taste so well. If you have a lower quality vodka, you can really taste the alcohol in the drinks, whereas our vodka, Karl did a great job on it, and it really hides itself well in the drinks. So our cocktails taste a lot better just because Karl knows what he's doing back there.
Can I throw in a plug for Todd as well? Is that we're now up to over 120 different infusions. And so Todd is a master of taking those base spirits and creating really amazing liquors and flavored vodkas and rums and tequilas and all the things that we have. So it's a really good synergy. I get to do distilling, and Todd is really creating great flavors, and his creativity is immense. And Tanya, in that pairing, we've just got a great synergy of folks that are doing everything special to our place.
Okay, we're at the spot for our first break. You're listening to Biz Talk with Score and WHBY, and we'll be right back.
Welcome back to our program this morning. You're listening to Biz Talk with Score on WHBY. And Terry and I today are talking with Karl Loewenstein and Todd McLean from Sturgeon Spirits. And it's a very spirited, sorry for the pun, conversation. But before we get back to that, I'd just like to take a few moments to talk to you about Score. Fox City Score serves an 8-county area with offices in Appleton, Oshkosh, and Fond du Lac. We have about 45 mentors, each an expert in their field, offering entrepreneurs no cost and confidential complimentary mentoring. Those areas of expertise include IT, social media, marketing, cash flow, accounting, strategic planning, workflow, human resources, retail, best practices, and many, many others. In order to register for a no-cost and confidential mentoring session or to learn more about the Fox City Score chapter, please visit our website at score.org/Fox Cities. You can learn more about how the Score chapter can assist you with starting and or growing your business, and you can complete an application for a mentoring session. Simply complete the online form and submit it to Score, and within a few days, a Score mentor will be contacting you to set up a meeting. Remember, Score is no cost and offers experts who can offer you assistance in many different areas. To get started, visit our website at score.org/Fox Cities. And to support small business people, Fox City Score is always looking for new mentors. If you have experience that you would like to share with others, we'd love to talk to you. We welcome volunteers with experience in all aspects of business. Small business owners need your help, and your experience can make a real difference to their success. Go to score.org/Fox Cities, click on the volunteer button, and fill out the short application. We'll have somebody get back to you to explain more. So thanks again for joining us this morning. And Karl and Todd, could you walk us through maybe the process that you had to go through in creating a production distillery versus one that you did for crafting?
Well, the easy part was scaling up. So still in my garage was about 5 gallons. Now I have about 350 gallons of distilling capacity, and the machine and the equipment that I need to do that. That was, I had to acquire that, and that was some work. But really the harder part is the regulatory side of things. To run a distillery, you need a whole set of federal and state permits that you have to have all the designs in place before you can submit. You have to demonstrate your security procedures. You have to demonstrate your capacities, your output, your storage. You have to have an on-site inspection. You have to do that at the federal level and then also at the state level, because both entities are really worried about the tax revenue that comes from spirits production. And so the regulatory environment for producing spirits, I'm not I'm not in the food safety business, but it's a pretty darn high hurdle. And I think one of the reasons that there aren't as many distilleries as there are breweries or wineries is that our regulatory rules are one step more difficult. So it took me 6 months to get the federal alcohol, what they're called the Tobacco and Trade Bureau permission to open a distillery. And only once I had that could I go to the Department of Revenue's alcohol division and get their approval, which is another multi-month process where they reviewed the federal documents and approved them at the state level. So there was besides the construction, and I did build out a whole new building, the regulatory hurdles were really were big, and made it a lot harder to start the business. In fact, not that I had trouble, it was just slow. I mean, it didn't really there weren't a lot of resistance. It was just many levels of review to get regulatory approval to run the business. And it really took almost a year to get the regulatory approval to open the business while we were rebuilding and reconstructing and ordering equipment, and getting everything else in place. So there was an extra hurdle that I think many small businesses don't have to deal with. But I'm hard-headed, so I kept at it.
During the exploration process, then, did you run into this, that you'd know this was going to be a big commitment of time and energy and effort to get this done, or is this something that kind of snuck up on and surprised you?
Well, and one of the things that I did is that I joined what we have is called the Wisconsin Distillers Guild, which is there are about 50 distilleries in Wisconsin, and about 3/4 of them are a member of this statewide organization. And so I started going to their meetings while I was planning this, and I had conversations with people who had done the same thing and talked about how they approached it. So it was another networking opportunity. So I had talked to people who had done it a few years or multiple years before me and had helped me work through the process. And I was lucky enough that I could call up just about any distillery in the state and say, hey, I have a problem. How did you deal with it? And they would help me. So it's really been a great community of distillers that is incredibly supportive. And so that I actually had a good sense going into what it was going to be like, because I had talked to people who had done it before me and could avoid some of the worst pitfalls of that process.
And did you work with, say, Go EDC or the Oshkosh Chamber of Commerce or others working on getting some help with grants and funding and loans too?
No, absolutely. So I have, it's very expensive. The other side, of course, of starting a distillery is my equipment is big and it's also quite expensive. And so I ended up working with all of the economic development agencies here in town. I actually have SBA loans that help me start the process. And then on top of that, I worked with Go EDC and got a local grant, both a grant and a loan through the local economic development agency to help me get this whole project going. And it would not have been possible without all of the great support that I've had from especially Go EDC, who are incredibly supportive. I talked to the Chamber of Commerce repeatedly. Our Discover Oshkosh Visitors Bureau has been incredibly supportive. So yeah, I mean, the network of local development agencies that helped us has been huge, and both financially and kind of PR wise.
And just as commentary, I'll throw out there that from my perspective, Oshkosh is one of the best communities in the Northeast in terms of having various government agencies to step in and really help with funding and grants and loans and bringing other people in. They've done a really good job in the last few years, and we've seen some very impressive things. So that's a good thing for the Oshkosh community. We are at this point for our second break. You're listening to Biz Talk with Score on WHBY, and I'll be right back. Welcome back to Biz Talk with Score. We're talking to Karl Loewenstein and Todd McLean from Sturgeon Spirits in Oshkosh. Before we get back to Karl and Todd, I wanted to give you a quick update on some educational opportunities. If you go to the SCORE website, so it's score.org/Fox Cities, you'll see a tab near the top for workshops and events. And there's always hundreds of webinars on there, but there are always live events coming up too. And you can either go to the national events or click on local on the left, and you'll see from across the country literally hundreds of opportunities. But there's two I wanted to mention nationally. Yes. And they're both on, or the first one's on April 16th, and it's QuickBooks, a basic guide for small business owners. So even if you're not doing your books yourself, this is a course we strongly recommend. Go learn about how QuickBooks is going to be used for you. Or if you're very small and starting out, QuickBooks is something that a lot of people use. So it's a good opportunity to learn about it. So it's April 16th, QuickBooks, a basic guide for small business owners. So that's at 1:00. Then on April 18th, also at 1:00, there's a seminar on summer hiring compliance and tips for success. So many people hire summer students, and this is just a recommendation you might want to get involved in to learn more about it. Again, April 18th, summer hiring, compliance tips and tips for success, 18th at 1 o'clock. So that's score.org/Fox Cities, and you'll find the workshops and events tab, and you can go to the live events, and you can find out more of that information. So now we'll turn back to Karl and Todd, and let's get into a little bit more about making the various products that you have. So let's start with, what exactly is distilling and how do you do it?
So basically, I don't know, have you guys had brewers on the show, right? So
Yep.
Basically what we do is we make beer and then we concentrate the alcohol off of the beer. So basically my process is that I take grain, and I put it in a big tank of hot water. I cook it until I can extract the sugars. Then I take the grain off and I make a big tank of sugar water to which I add yeast. The yeast eats the sugar and turns it into alcohol. And then I get a big tub of, well, sometimes we even call it beer. It's about 8 to 10% alcohol solution. I then pump that from my fermenting tank into my still, and in my still I boil it. And basically what distilling takes advantage of the fact that alcohol has a lower boiling point than water. So alcohol boils about 172, water boils at 212. And so you keep your temperature between 170 and 212. And so the steam coming off is mostly alcohol. And then you hit that steam with cold water, reliquefies it, and collect it. So distilling is really a pretty simple process. You make your sugar water, you ferment it, and then you concentrate the alcohol. And you have your big shiny copper stills because that makes the spirits taste good with the copper. And so when you...
How do you add the flavoring to it?
So there are two ways. Sometimes, depending on your product, you do a different recipe in your mash tun, or what you start with. So whiskey versus rum versus tequila versus vodka, those all have different recipes. And then you distill them, and some of the flavor comes through from the distilling. But many, and I guess most of our flavors is that we like to take local, hopefully fresh ingredients and add them to our very clean vodka, and then that flavor infuses into the vodka as we go.
Lots and lots of mason jars. Lots. So my goal, like Karl said, is to have everything locally grown. I want fresh products. I would say probably 85 to 90% of our stuff is made with real stuff. Like I said, mason jars. I do have a few extracts that I found that work really well. But most of it is locally grown products that I get from farmers markets and stores and stuff.
Okay. So now that you've got the distilled alcohol, and you've done the basic things you like, how do you, the basic outputs and different types of spirits, how do you decide what works best for your distillery? And do you just do experimentation of different types of things and see how it works based on what Todd's asking you about?
So how I do it is 20 years of experience comes down to what drinks go well together, what flavors go well together. Most of it, I do a ton of research. Like I said, I just got a degree that took a lot of research. Research is one of my favorite things to do. So many Pinterest rabbit holes I go down for hours and hours to figure out what recipes work well together. And once I have those, I ask Karl to make the base spirit, and then I flavor them to work well in a cocktail.
Okay. And when we're setting up the distillery, was the idea to have the cocktail room? Was that there from the beginning and try different cocktails, or did that evolve as Todd got more involved in the business?
Well, I would say that originally my idea was that I would produce spirits and sell them in other locations. But again, doing my research, I realized that The distillery business model is that essentially you pay the bills out of your cocktail bar and you make your profits in distribution. And so this is an integral part of the business model from where we started. And as I mentioned before, I had no idea what I was doing. So I needed someone like Todd to come in and say, we need this part to be successful. We need this part to help, get the cash flow going before we build the distribution side of the business. So it's an integral part. So I knew it was coming and I knew I needed help to make it successful. Okay. And that's really what Todd has done for us.
Okay. So now let's move into a little bit more on this. You've got it made and you're doing some of the selling and marketing. So let's start with online or on site. Sorry. So you've got the cocktail lounge, essentially. Is that also where people buy the spirits themselves too in the bottles as well? Or is there a separate store type of location?
Well, this takes us back to your question, I think, in the first segment about the regulatory environment. So as a spirit company, and the license that we have from the state, we can sell our products at retail, both in bottle and cocktail in our facility. And then to sell in other places, we have to go through a distributor. We can't sell directly to another restaurant, bar, grocery store. It has to go through the hands of a distributor. And so we do, at this point, about 90% of our business, both bottles and cocktails from our retail location here. And we are building our distribution side of things, but it's still much smaller than what we do right here in the store. So people come in, and I say our ideal is people come in as a couple or as a group. They had 2 cocktails and take a bottle or 2 home with them. Okay. And it's been a really successful business model.
Okay. And so that's the base point for building your business. The tasting room, would you have been anywhere near successful without the tasting room?
No, absolutely not. This business would not work. As I said, we're doing 90% of our business from this tasting room. And so in the future, I am sure we will grow out of the business. And that's one of my goals for growth is how do we build our sales and our reputation so that when you're at the grocery store, you pick up a bottle of Sturgeon spirits as opposed to, a national brand. But that's a marketing piece and we're working on that. We're just hiring someone to do direct sales for us. We also kind of are building a social media manager position. So these are places that we have identified for growing the business as we go forward. So how do we get our name out? And so people will come in. We like that, but we also want them to make the choice to buy our product when they're in other places or ask in other bars, make me a vodka tonic with Sturgeon spirits instead of Tito's. We want to build that recognition out there in the community as well as here in the tasting room.
Okay. So as the tasting room, as the business is built and you're starting to add various roles and employees, how do you manage the desire for growth with the need for cash flow and profit at the same time?
Well, isn't that what the mentors are supposed to help me with? I mean, I would say that I think we're struggling at that point. I don't even say it's struggling, but we're at that point, right? So now it's time to start adding extra people. And Todd and I have been having that conversation about how to build some new full-time roles. And I perhaps let Todd talk about staffing a little bit, but right now Todd's the only full-time employee. We have 6 part-time employees, but it's time to add another full-time person who can focus on our business and how do we design that position effectively for all the needs that we have. And so there's so many roles that you have because we're both manufacturing, experimentation, bartending, social media, we're serving, we're building an event space manager. There are lots of roles, and we're at that point. It's like, we need more help to build the cash flow, but the cash flow is on the cusp of supporting new roles. So this is a good question for, I think we're working through that at the moment. And I actually am in a conversation with GoEDC again about the new space and how we start expanding and building both the staff and the capacity here in our building for that. So I don't know the right answer to that question yet. It's one that we're working with, because we know in the next year we're really going to grow, and we need to build the staff capacity to do that.
Yeah, it's actually one of the best parts about being a SCORE mentor. I had a conversation with a client today and got off the phone and realized all we talked about are what seemed like problems, yet this business is phenomenal and it's going so well. And so it's solving problems. That's not a bad thing, but it's really an interesting aspect to all of the small business. So let's talk a little bit about finding other retail locations. When I went on your website, I know you're sold at a few other locations now. You talked about having to go through a distributor. How did you get that started? And you mentioned potentially hiring for that. Where do you see it going?
Well, there are two parts to that. Number one is that there was a new the Alcohol Modernization Act that was passed December of last year. One of the provisions of that new law will allow us to self-distribute but not until January 2025. So right now, we are still under the old rules, which basically says we sell our product to our distributor, which is Lee Beverage. Lee Beverage then sells our product to the retail establishment. But because we're a small entity, there's not a lot of incentive for Lee to push our product. And so we're having our own internal salesman hired by us who will go out to that bar and say, hey, buy our product from Lee Beverage for the next year. And then in January, we'll be able to sell our product directly where that bar, restaurant, grocery store we can just give them the product when they buy it or deliver it ourselves. So being a spirits business, that middleman has slowed our growth because they're a much bigger entity than us. And they sell national brands and they have a much higher volume than what we're doing right now. So it's hard for them, there's not a lot of incentive on their side to push small brands. As we grow, they will be more interested. But right now we have to do our own sales, even if we don't. I mean, it's like our own indirect sales. So it's a really kind of a weird market. But I've talked to lots of other people, beer industry as well. As you grow, they, like New Glarus still employs their own salesmen, even though they don't sell directly to any retail. Right.
Okay.
And that's kind of where we are, is you need your own salesman, even if you don't directly sell to your end customer, your bar or your restaurant or your grocery store.
So what about e-commerce? Can you sell online yet? And what's that involve?
The short answer is no. It is illegal to sell spirits. In fact, it's, as far as we can tell, illegal to mail spirits. So we're not allowed to sell online at all. Now, I was talking to, there's a couple national companies that have found loopholes around this, though we have not developed a relationship yet with them. But right now, everything has to be in person. Wisconsin state law says that it has to be handed face to face to the consumer, right? We can't sell something that we haven't actually seen the consumer who's buying it.
Yeah, it's interesting that wineries can ship you stuff from all over the country, but small.
And that's part of the weird regulatory environment, is that spirits are more highly regulated than wineries and breweries. And wine and beer are seen as, and I'm not sure if it's just because it's kind of seen as more dangerous, or the tax revenue. I pay a lot more taxes per gallon of alcohol than beer or wineries do also. So is it a tax, or is it kind of the fear that spirit consumption is more dangerous than having a beer? I'm not sure. Historically, I think it tends to be a combination of both taxes and the fear of drunk people.
Yeah. So, which brings you hope back to the cocktail lounge and being able to avoid some of those problems with the way you're set up already.
No, absolutely. And that's I think Todd could talk about this too, is that we're really about an experience rather than, this is not a place you come to pound shots.
Right.
It's a place you come to talk about distilling, to talk with Todd and Tanya and me, and to learn a little bit about the business.
Yeah, I think this gets back more to your staffing issues too, where when I go to hire somebody, I would rather not have some college kid in here in his 20s, bringing his friends down to get him drunk and overpouring and things like that. I'd much rather have somebody that's over that, hump, right? And so they can have a full conversation with somebody about what we're doing here instead of being over the corner on their phone.
Okay. So as you look at everything you've gone through in the last couple of years, if you're starting over and got to do a redo, is there anything you do differently?
Well, I mean, I would say we've learned a lot. It's hard to say that I guess I don't know that I would say that there have been any really big mistakes. I surely would organize things a bit differently. But I don't really, when I come into it, I don't know if I would say there's a glaring error. Well, I mean, we've had some failures besides hiring Todd, of course. That failure. But otherwise,
I've made some mistakes making some flavors that I just, probably should have tried.
So as we wrap up this segment, my last question for you is on your website, you mentioned an event venue potentially for the future, and you talked earlier about maybe working with GoEDC. Can you tell us anything about that and where that could be?
Well, this is a whole different issue, right? Because when I bought the building, when I started this project, I had a renter for about the first year and a half. I asked the renter to move out in the fall when his lease was up. And so I'm now turning that space into an event space. And now we're going on about 3 months of trying to find a contractor who will actually give us a bid to redo the space. I mean, not even work on the space, to get a bid. So I don't actually have a total good sense of what it's going to cost me in this current environment. And so I've already reached out to GoEDC about helping me do some refinancing and reshaping some of our loans so that we can make the investment to turn that into a private party space, kind of an overflow space for the bar when we're really busy. Todd mentioned we're a space without television, without TVs. It might be a place where if you wanted to have a business meeting and have a presentation, it'll have a screen on that side. So we've got visions how this space can help benefit the business. But first we have to get a contractor in who will redo it for us.
On that note, we're going to take our final break. You're listening to Biz Talk with Score on WHBY, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Biz Talk. I would like to thank our sponsors who bring Biz Talk to you each weekend. We couldn't present Biz Talk without their generous support. Thank you to Hailing & Associates. Hailing & Associates helps small businesses and individuals not just prepare tax returns, but plan for taxes, helping you to minimize taxes for this year and beyond. Hailing & Associates, personal connection, positive results. And a special thank you to the Business News for promoting our program in the biweekly business newspaper serving Northeast Wisconsin. If you aren't already subscribing to the Business News, you should. The paper is delivered biweekly and contains relevant and useful information about the business community in Northeast Wisconsin. And without giving any details, I'd just like to say that we have 2 new sponsors who will be joining later this year, hopefully one in the next 2 or 3 months and then one later in the year. But we're excited to continue to offer Biz Talk to you and thankful for the help of our sponsors. So with that, let's turn back to Karl and Todd. And Todd, could you tell people where they can find Sturgeon Spirits?
Absolutely. We have sturgeonspirits.com on the web. We have an Instagram, Sturgeon Spirits. We got TikTok now. That is also Sturgeon Spirits. Everything, Facebook, Sturgeon Spirits. We did excellent branding. We actually got exactly what we wanted. So that's perfect. We are located on the south side of Oshkosh, 2663 Oregon Street. And our telephone number is 920-267-5192. You can call that anytime. Karl is always here.
All right. So as you look at the business, and you've got a great story of the startup and how you've gone everything, and we talked a lot about different aspects of potential growth. What's the future hold for Sturgeon Spirits? Where do you see it?
I would say that we are doing phenomenally well in our first year. We're about 16 months old here in the tasting room. So our on-site business has really been growing, and that's part of our expansion plans to grow the on-site business. But But also, as I mentioned before, I would like to see in this year that we really become a product that you can find in every other bar, restaurant, and grocery store, and that we are a local phenomenon, that you can find us all around the Sturgeon spearing, cultural area, Winnebago watershed, places who appreciate sturgeon. One thing I didn't mention is we support Sturgeon for Tomorrow, we support conservation efforts, and that's very important to us as well, to keep the sturgeon population vibrant and the community successful here.
And one of the things people notice if they go onto your website and look at the places we are available, they are all surrounding Lake Winnebago. And as you grow that out, it's another aspect of supporting the lake and the sturgeon fishing aspect of the business.
That's right. I think that one of the things that I wanted when I started a business was to support our community, and there is nothing more important to us than sturgeon and the sturgeon spearing season here in the whole area.
Yeah. And I want to thank you for being on the show. It's a great story. It's a really good example of doing the research, figuring out how a business can go, coming up with a great brand, and then learning to accept and work through government regulation that could stop many people. So great job, and thank you for being on the show. For our listeners, thank you for listening to Biz Talk with Score. You can go to our website at biztalkwithscore.com to hear previous shows, and you'll be able to hear this one again in a few weeks. So thank you again, and everybody have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you next week.